So, welcome to our 5 ways to create more happiness. And I'm going to start with this quote from Marcus Aurelius. And it's very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. So, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So, you should all see my big screen, 5 ways to create more happiness. So, what actually is happiness? And I think that is, one of the questions that people think when we said we were creating this eclectic well-being, a lot of people think that well-being and happiness are very similar or the same thing. And actually, happiness is just a part of well-being. So, happiness is an emotion, and it really incorporates the part of well-being that is positive emotion. Because almost any positive emotion, we could also correlate to ourselves being happy. So happiness is really just one part of well-being. The other parts, in case you're curious, are engagement, relationships, meaning, accomplishment, and then health. So with happiness, it's tied specifically to positive emotion, but it also has a huge significance into our relationships, and we'll talk about that, and with our engagement. Those would be the three other pillars of well-being that happiness actually relates right back to, because it's hard to have really strong relationships if we're not happy in them, right? I think they kind of go hand in hand. So I'm going to start out, and most of you have probably heard me or Mark say this quote, but Einstein once said, the most important decision you make is whether you live in a friendly universe or a hostile one. And to me, this quote is directly related to happiness. And that's because it sets up our mindset. If we believe we live in a friendly universe, well, then it's going to be easier to acknowledge things and have things make us or feel like they make us happy. We can accept that happiness. Because if we believe the opposite, that we live in a hostile universe, even when positive things happen, we don't look at it in the same way. We don't have that same feeling of happiness because underneath, we may be wondering, oh, yeah, that's for right now, but is that really going to last? Or, yeah, it's no big deal. We just look at things in a totally different perspective. So if we start with this first, that we believe we live in a friendly universe, then we're going to be more likely to experience more happiness and to accept when things happen, to acknowledge that, okay, that actually made me happy. And all of this is because we process things through this other lens, that life is working for my greatest growth. And when you look at things that way, you experience your emotions in a totally different perspective, right? You can find the positive in almost any situation. So you may not be happy, but when we're starting to feel more positive, that leads to us then to begin to open ourselves up to feel happiness. Happiness is also more of a uh, emotion in time. So again, the difference between having high levels of well-being and being happy is happiness comes and goes, right? We feel different emotions throughout the day, throughout our lives. And happiness is just one of them. To have higher levels of well-being, we can increase our happiness, but we also have to do other things as well. And that's all for another day. I just wanted to kind of make that differentiation between well-being and happiness. So in my experience, I feel so many of us are on this, what Mark and I are calling the hamster wheel of mediocrity. And it's just that we get into the same routines. We do the same things over and over. And this is really all due to the way the brain works. And so just going to quickly go over how the brain works. But the brain, we're born with essentially the same amount of neurons and the same amount of neural connections as an adult, but those connections aren't quite there yet. So put it this way, we have the same neurons. We have the capacity to have about 5 trillion connections to those neurons, but as a baby, we only have about 50. So we get these, we don't get, but we create these connections as we grow up. And that's why so many things that happen to us in our childhood actually stay with us. And so these connections are what help us to live our daily lives without thinking about things like tying our shoes, right? We all know how, once we learn how to tie our shoes, we don't really think about it. It's just kind of this automatic thing that we do. Same thing as like driving a car. I don't know about you, but I've driven places and I'm like, wow, I don't really remember that drive because my brain knows how to drive the car. It knows how to look for things while it can also kind of be in another place. Not a really great driving experience, but I'd be a liar to say that I haven't been there. And this is how the brain works. We have these connections, and this is really good to help us in our daily lives. It's not really good when it comes to emotions, happiness being one of them. Our brain starts to realize what makes us happy, and then it just goes to that. And if those things don't happen, well, then we don't experience as much happiness, right? So when we get stuck in that only these things make us happy, we start losing that happiness because we don't experience them often enough. So then we start feeling we're not happy as much. And so then this happiness equation comes to be, I'm not feeling all that happy. We kind of get into the same routine. And when those same routines happen, the happiness, that emotion of happiness kind of gets lost. Now, for years, psychologists or whole field of psychology focused on, well, what are the negative behaviors that we're doing? How can we stop doing these negative things? How can we put away those things and that will create higher well-being, that'll create more happiness? Well, unfortunately, that doesn't always work. And for psychology, we've been doing this for hundreds of years, looking at what's wrong with us. And about 50 years or so ago, there was a group of psychologists that started looking at what is right with us. What can we focus on that is right within us, our strengths, our values, and how, when we focus on that, could that create higher levels of well-being? And how could that create higher levels of happiness? So positive psychology came up with this via character strengths. And this was born two gentlemen, Christopher Peterson and Martin Seligman. And I know more about Martin Seligman than I do Christopher Peterson, but they came up with this classification of character strengths. So some of you may know what character strengths are. Some of you, this may be brand new information. So I'm going to go through it kind of briefly, but if you have questions, we'll definitely have time for you to ask them. So what they did is, in around the year 2000, they started researching and going through various cultures all across the globe and looking at what was important to these human beings. What did they see as what made the character of a person? And they found that throughout all these cultures, that there were these 24 character strengths. And when I say they looked at cultures, they actually even looked at places, or not places, but culture things like Star Trek. What in Star Trek, like in Klingons, did they see as character? They looked at remote places in the Amazon. What did they see as character? So this is really was a lot of soul searching as to what human beings naturally, instinctively look at as part of our character. And so these 24 character strengths, we all have them. We just use them differently. We use them at different ratios. So all of you, I think everyone who's on, because a few people have joined, I think everyone who's on has gotten their report. So you can see that the report ranks, whether you have the total 24 or whether you have the generic report, you can see that it ranks your 24 character strengths. The bottom ones are not your weaknesses. Those are simply the character strengths you don't use as often. It doesn't mean that you don't use them ever. It means they don't come naturally to you. They're not necessarily those character strengths that you go to when you need to. Now, you also may find that some of your bottom strengths are ones that you go to occasionally when a specific situation happens. So the whole idea of these character strengths and why they're so important and why I use them in my coaching practice is because when we start to understand them, we gain better knowledge about ourselves. We actually notice that we can overuse a character strength. Um, my son right now, I can tell you, he is using his character strength of not perspective, judgment to an extent that he's overjudging everything. And so if we recognize, oh, this is my character strength that I use naturally, but now I'm overusing it, like any good thing, like too much ice cream, we can use it to our detriment. So they put these character strengths also in these virtues. And it's kind of funny because I was just on something. Oh, I was researching more about Marcus Aurelius, who I started this workshop with, his quote. And I was researching more about him, and he believed in 4 virtues. And they were wisdom, courage, whoops. Ah, okay, I hate when I do that with my mouse. But they were wisdom, courage, and I can't remember the third one here, but they kind of went directly back to the system. And I'm talking off my head because I just read this morning, but I found it very interesting that his virtues correlated back to via character strengths virtues, and I just thought that was pretty cool. But anyways, so before we go further, I wanted to ask you, if you haven't looked at your character strengths, that you look at them right now and notice which ones are at the top. Those are what we call your signature strengths. And your signature strengths are what come naturally to you. You can't imagine life without those strengths being present in your daily life. So why is this important? Well, I don't know if you guys see that, but where I see your faces, which I like to see your faces as I'm presenting, it's a big black box on half of my screen. So I just had to move it. But anyways, 75% of people in the US are not flourishing. So what does flourishing mean? Well, flourishing is when we're engaged in our work and time passes quickly. It's when we're so focused that time goes by, we love what we're doing, and we're just in this really good state. The second thing is 70% report not being engaged in their work at all. So 75% are not flourishing, and 70%, so almost the same amount of people, they're not even engaged in their work. They go to work every day, but they're just kind of going through the motions. And this all comes down to, I believe, that 60% do not have a meaningful awareness of their strengths. So this is why I think it's really important first, before we get into the happiness part, is understanding your strengths. Which ones are those that you really utilize on a daily basis? And can you use them, even if you don't use them on a daily basis, they're what make you you. Can you use them more? And I'll give you an example. So when I worked at Nautica, you could say that for a while there, I was not engaged in my work. I really didn't like my job, but how I was able to engage in it and how I would be able to really start enjoying and being happy in my work was that I engaged the character strengths. And part of that was learning. So one of my top strengths is continuous learning. Another one is honesty. So I really enjoyed being in meetings where I could be honest and share my opinion. So when we can engage our inherent core strengths, our values of what makes us who we are, well, then we can be more likely to be flourishing. And when we're flourishing, we're happy because we're engaged in our work. So all of this kind of ties together in that we want to be able to use our strengths. We want to be happy. And when we do those, happiness actually occurs. So before I go further, are there any questions about your report? And again, I am recording this for those of you that joined late. This is being recorded. So yes, your voice will be recorded. But please feel free, even if you don't want to do that, you could post it in the chat. I will have to see if I can get the chat up. Let me stop sharing for a moment. and I can put the chat up. So if there's any questions, if you want to open up your mic, totally fine. If you'd rather just post it in the chat, that's fine too. Nobody has any questions about their report? Okay, well then if we don't have any questions, we'll continue. All right, if you don't want to, if you are hesitant to question things, you can always contact me afterwards if you're more wanting to do that on a one-to-one basis. All right, let's keep going here. All right, so
Laura had a question.
okay. Who has a question?
It's in the chat.
Oh, Laura, how do you know which items to work on? Ah, it's up to you. So your character strengths, so let me go through this. I'll go through it more slowly here. So if you look at the report, your top 5 to 7, the report says your top 5 are your signature strengths, but because I've seen this now with the total 24 report, which is a more detailed report, a more robust report, many people have more than 5 signature strengths because their top 3 may be all tied, their next 2 are tied, and so you actually have more. But let's just say the top 5, those are your signature strengths. Normally, those feel like they're you. I really haven't come across anyone who says, nope, that one is not me. They may have been surprised that it was up there, but when they really start thinking about it, they're like, yeah, those are the ones I use every day. Now, 2 different things with that. You may be overusing them. Our signature strengths are really things that make us who we are, but then sometimes we overuse them, and we overuse them to a point that we're no longer using them as a strength, and they actually become a detriment to us. So we can focus on that and say, all right, I'm not going to use this strength quite as often. Or we can actually go and look at some of our lower strengths. Our middle strengths many times are those that they don't come 100% naturally to us, that we use them all the time, but they come to us in certain situations. So in certain situations, we'll say, that's the strength I always go to. Maybe we think we'd get more out of life if we focused on it more. So then we can work on those. For me, when the first time I ever got my character strengths, zest was at the very bottom. And I hated that, but it was true. I was a very serious person. I worked really hard. I didn't take time for fun. And so I started, it wasn't that I couldn't have zest in my life or I didn't have zest and I didn't use zest. I just didn't use it very often. And I wanted to use it more. So that was actually my word of the year for 2020. Yes, 2020. My word of the year was zest. And I actually tried really hard all year to have a zestful year. And that was hard, but I focused on it. And you know what? There were some really good times during that year. Maybe a little bit difficult for you to believe, but you know, I was focused on that. And I actually, at the beginning of this, one of the other participants, she took her character strengths assessment not quite a year ago, and she had wondered if she should take it again. And they recommend you don't take it more often than once a year. So when my 1 year came, I wanted to see, did zest move up? So I took my survey again, and zest did. It's not it'll never be one of my signature strengths. It's just not who I am. But I felt having more zest would actually bring me more happiness. But we'll get into that because zest is actually one of the 5 character strengths that is definitely correlated right to happiness. So hopefully that answered your question, kind of in a long-winded way. And we'll get to more on what items to work on because we're going to get into the 5 character strengths that actually promote happiness. There's a direct research has shown there's a direct correlation to happiness. All right, let me go back to sharing my screen. Sometimes I get all confused as to which screen I'm sharing, but I think I've got the right one. There we go. All right, you guys can see my PowerPoint, right? Okay. So here are the questions that I always say you should first ask when you get your profile. First time you get your profile, you want to look at what are your first thoughts of your strengths profile. And if you look at your top strengths, I just described them. I said they were your signature strengths, but are they essential to who you are? These are the 3 E's. Are they essential to who you are? Are they effortless? Like you use them, you don't even think about it. You just use them. And do they energize you when you use them? Like you feel really good when you use them. And then the third thing would be to notice, are there any surprises? Is there anything about the report that surprises you? For instance, I had someone who was very surprised that leadership was lower for them, yet they were a leader in their organization. So leadership with character strengths isn't necessarily what we think of as leadership in the workplace. Leadership in our character strengths is we just naturally want to lead people. So we are naturally wanting to help people grow. We want to naturally help them resolve their issues. That may not be the same thing as leadership in the workplace. So there is a slight bit of difference there. Same thing with love. Love in our character strengths it's still relationship based, but it is not a romantic love. It is a love of caring deeply about other people. So we could actually use love in the workplace. And those of us who have love high on our character strength profile, we may use love in the workplace just by really caring about our people. And we're going to talk more about that because love is actually another one of those character strengths that is directly correlated to happiness. So if you look at your profile, the other things you can think of is when I'm at my best, when I had something that I really reflect on and was either a goal that I achieved or a point in time in my life that felt really good, what were those character strengths that I was using? We don't think of that when we're in the moment, but when we reflect on things, we can actually look at this and see this. So I would take a moment and just reflect on your top character strengths. How do they feel for you? Do they feel essential, effortless, and energizing to you? And so one of the things we're not going to spend a lot of time on here is your signature strengths. If you can use them every day, and this is a big difference, and try to use them differently, you will tend to be happier and more engaged in what you're doing. Because when we add that and use them differently, we're adding another layer into what makes us happy. So that character strength, inherently, it makes us happy. It's part of who we are. And when we use what's really us, I mean, think of it. When we're authentic, we're happier. When we're trying to put on airs and we're trying to be someone we're not usually happy in ourselves. I would say we're never happy in ourselves when we're doing that. We're happy when we are our authentic selves. And our authentic selves are using those top character strengths. But if we can use them in a new way, then remember how I said how the patterns in the brain, we now have given them another way to be happy. So instead of just going back to the same things that make us happy, we use our character strengths in a new way. And sometimes it takes thinking about that, right? It takes reflecting on, well, how can I use this in a new way? What can I do differently? And that's where I can help you when we go through the 5 character strengths for happiness, we're going to talk about different things we could do. But really, looking at that and wondering, well, how can I use my signature strengths in a new way? So that's one secret that it wasn't part of the 5 ways, but one way to create more happiness for yourself is to use your character strengths every day in a new way. The other thing I would mention here before we go into the specific 5 character strengths for happiness is, are you using your character strengths at work? If you are working or whatever you're doing, if you're not working, if whatever you do on a daily basis, are you using them? So whether you're a volunteer, whether you are with your children, right? If you're a stay-at-home mom, you can still find ways to use your signature strengths. And when you use them every day in your personal, work, volunteer life, you're going to find that you're happier, that you get closer to then flourishing in your life. So any questions? I'm going to see if I can get the chat box open. There you go. Oh, I'm learning how to have multiple things, only now it's like, how many things can I look at? I've got the chat box open, I got your pretty faces over here, and I got my screen to look at. All right, so I don't see anything in the chat. All right, so now we are going to get into the 5 character strengths that if they're somewhere on your profile, and if they're lower, these may be, back to Laura's original question, something you want to work on if you want more happiness in your life. Because if they're at the lower end, maybe using them more can create more space for happiness. So the first one is curiosity. So why do we think, and here's where we're going to get some interaction, right? Why do we think curiosity would be tied to happiness? So you can either unmute yourself if you don't mind having your voice recorded, or you can type it in the chat box, whatever you prefer. Why is curiosity, why would that be tied to happiness?
I would say it's related to exploring, stepping out of your comfort zone.
Huh? And why do we think that would make us happier?
Because you're changing your day to day. You're changing your routine. You're stimulating the brain in a different way.
Exactly. You're having your brain work differently, right? You are exercising that part of your mind that leads you to pursue new and different things. So exactly what Laura said, you're exploring your world, you're exploring yourself. We can be curious about other people. So what are some ways that we can use curiosity more? I mean, if we think of, so maybe let's think of a situation, maybe a relationship or a part of your life that you don't feel quite as happy about. And see if you could figure out how to use curiosity in that part of your life in order to create more happiness. And I'll give you an example for me. My relationship with my mom is not, I wouldn't call it happy. Love her dearly, but I wouldn't call it, it's not one of my happiest relationships. And so for me, I've been trying to use curiosity with her in order to develop a more happy perspective, a more happy type of relationship. Now, it's been difficult because we haven't seen each other throughout this pandemic, but I do things like asking her different questions, really being curious about her day. How does she feel? What did she actually do during the day? Now, she loves to tell me what she does, but sometimes she doesn't get into the details. So I've been trying to use those type of questions of truly being curious about her life. So anyone have anything they'd like to share that they can think of how they could use curiosity to improve an area of their life and bring more happiness to it?
For me, I think it's going to be a career change.
So being curious about the new career change, Rita.
Yeah. Yes.
So how can you use curiosity?
Well, I can certainly get out there and do what I've done for several years now and enjoy going to different coffee shops and being curious about what's different about this one than the one I visited yesterday. Being curious about whose coffee beans they use.
Ah,
And well, what is your barista seasonal special drink? Maybe even trying to guess what that is with the season changes.
Those are all awesome things. Sandra, did you have something? I saw you pop on for a second. Oh, there you
I'm
go.
struggling to drink my smoothie, so I didn't want to make a funny face, but um curiosity, I think a lot of times, like for example, using it simply as like when I go for a run, I wonder what's up that road. Let me turn left instead of turning right today, like that kind of thing. And then like this morning, for example, I was pleasantly surprised. I'm like, wow, I didn't really think that this was back this way. And you just see lots of pretty things, and that makes you happy. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm glad I made a left instead of a right this time. And just to kind of explore your world a little bit more. And
Yeah.
then with other things in life, it's almost like, especially when you get at a crossroads that you have to make a decision, you're like, well, what if I took like the road less traveled, I guess, or what if I did this versus being what everybody thinks is the way that everybody kind of looks at, like, no, you have to, like, for example, work a 9 to 5 job, and you have to do things this way and whatever. Like, what if I decided what would it look like if I decided to buy an RV, sell everything, and just travel across the country and homeschool my daughter? Hey, why not? Like, I think
Actually know someone who did that for 6 months.
I might be doing that sooner than we think.
Yeah. Curiosity it's one of those things I feel that we can use just randomly to create this space that actually can bring us happiness. And one of the things I just recently did, so going back to how the brain, it just normally goes to these patterns. And the pattern in my brain is I don't like tomatoes. It's what I've said from the time I was a kid. I don't like tomatoes. When someone asks me, do I want tomatoes on that? No, I don't like tomatoes. Yet, if I get a sandwich served to me with a tomato on it, I usually will eat it, and I don't really pay much attention to it. So the farm we belong to has these heirloom tomatoes, which everyone raves about. And I just became curious about it. So I took one and I brought it home and I researched, like, okay, so what's so special about heirloom tomatoes? And what I found is you don't really want to cook them, but you could warm them. Because one thing I have found is I don't like tomatoes cold. I prefer them a little bit warm. So I was curious as to what a just slightly warm slice of an heirloom tomato with my egg would be one morning. Oh my God, that is my favorite breakfast now. Like now I am like, oh, that's really good. So now I looked forward to it, where I was getting really bored with my breakfast every morning because I normally have 2 eggs, and the tomato really made it interesting. So anyone else have anything about curiosity? Because curiosity is one of the easiest signature strengths to start using. Just start asking why. Be a kid again. You know, those kids, my husband says he was one of those obnoxious ones that asked why all the time. But literally, that's being curious. That's wanting to know, and that leads to happiness. So anyone else have anything? All right. So the next signature strength that is directly correlated to happiness is love. And I don't think that surprises anyone. Um, the strength of love involves really, though, both giving and receiving. And sometimes for us to be happier is that opening up of allowing ourselves to receive love from others. And it's really, to me, the signature strength that is the foundation for building those healthy, positive relationships. So if you remember at the beginning, I talked about the pillars of well-being and relationships being one of them. If we're struggling with our relationships, sometimes going to this signature strength of love can really help us. And like I said, it's not the romantic love. This is really, it's more than kindness. It's a deep feeling for another being. What love can do is when we use our character strength of love, you'll notice that there is no character strength for compassion. But love would be very much tied to compassion, right? So if we start using love more, of course, we're going to have more compassion for other people. So again, the same exercise. How could you use love as a character strength in an area of your life right now that is not fulfilling you, that is not bringing you happiness? Does anyone have any way that they think that they could use love perhaps differently or just use it more often in order to create this happiness in their life?
Well, it's number 20 on my list, so I have some homework to do.
Now, don't get frustrated there, Laura, because
Oh
everyone's
no,
like,
I'm not. I love this. Literally, I love it. I think this is great.
so how do you think you could use love more often?
I think just being more present. I get so caught up. You mentioned earlier on in your conversation that, when you were in the height of your career, you were so focused on that. And I'm a lot like that as well. And I think it's really hard for me to break away from that. And I'm at a point now in my life where, and it has nothing to do with the pandemic, it's just, chronological, but my son's 21 now. So like my role and he's going into a senior year of college. So my role as an individual has completely shifted. And so I don't have to be on that same level anymore. So tapping into my curiosity, I think I can learn more about my interactions with people on a daily basis and just be more present with them, and really focus on that, because I don't think I've done a really good job of that.
Okay. And I'm just going to say this because I would not believe that you had a son that old.
He's my one and only.
Aw.
But it's funny, just going through all of these characteristics. The one thing, just being a parent and how that shifts and changes you on so many levels, and you dedicate so much of your life to that. And then when they don't need you on the same level, there's a little bit of heartache involved with that I don't think anything prepares you for that. So it's scary at times, but also very exciting as far as the possibilities. So
Yeah.
that's kind of like where I'm at right now. It's like, all right, where can I go now? Like, what can I do now that I've put on hold? So it's exciting.
Good. I'm glad. So I loved what you said about being present, because sometimes it's not just carving out time to be with those that we love, but it's actually being present. And you can see how then love and curiosity can be used together. So you carve out that time, you're present, and then you use that curiosity to even ask them more questions to find out more. And it's funny how when we do that, particularly with the people we do truly love, like our children, how that creates more happiness, not only for us, but for them, because then they see that interaction changing. I love that. Anyone else have any comments about love?
Kathy, this may seem off the wall, but I think about things like falling in love with things or activities or projects or something like that, particularly something that's new to you, which I guess ties back to curiosity. But two things that have happened for me just in the last week or so that I can relate to in this area is, number one, as you know, I just bought a cool little fun weekend car, and it's fast. And I'm just, not that I want to drive 100 miles an hour, but I want to be the first person there at 60 miles an hour. So for me, the adrenaline rush is just, getting up to 70 on the ramp, to hit the interstate or whatever. But it's just, it makes me happy. It just
Exactly.
And then
yeah, you fell in love with your car.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, last night, this was just the oddest experience, and I've thought about it a lot since then, but I was at a high school football game. My niece is a cheerleader, and it's her senior year. And so I was there, of course, to support her. But it just so happened where I was sitting, her dad was standing, and he was talking with two other men. So it was a guy conversation I was overhearing. But it just made me so happy, because my niece's husband was talking about how much he loved his now relationship with his 21-year-old and his 25-year-old son as adults, and how different it was than when they were children. And he was just bragging on them to these men. And I was like, wow, this is just hearing that man talk like that was just really, it was energizing.
Yeah, but men have the capacity just as much to fall in love with things and really be present. That's an awesome story. All right, the third one, the third strength is gratitude. And this may seem so, I guess, natural that the more grateful we are, the happier we are. But I think gratitude is one of those strengths that goes on autopilot. You know, we don't necessarily express our gratitude consistently. At least I don't. And so you can probably tell gratitude is not one of my top character strengths. But it is when we express gratitude. And the reason why, think of your brain. If you're thankful for something, well, then we think that thing is a positive thing, which is going to create more space for happiness. So gratitude is one of those things that is easily ignited. Like there are so many ways to ignite gratitude, but it all comes down to us doing that work. You know, love, curiosity, those things can kind of happen naturally, in my opinion. But gratitude is one of those things that sometimes, if it's not a natural one of your top character strengths, you almost have to engage it. And I guess I'm just talking about my own experience because I can tend to take gratitude for granted, right? It's not that I'm not thankful. I just don't take the time to actually acknowledge that gratitude. But when I do take that time, when I take the time to write a thank you card, when I take the time to actually acknowledge that someone did something nice for me, it not only makes them feel better, but it actually creates the space for me to feel better. So if we can go back to the same exercise, where in your life are you looking to create more happiness? How could you use gratitude there? Any thoughts?
If I can share, I think a lot of times when we realize how much we have, and I'm not talking about material things because over the years I've learned more and more that money doesn't make you happy. People that I know that have 2, 3, 4 times the amount of money I have are not as happy as I am.
Mhm.
Just like things as simple as watching those around you be healthy, and when you see like a sick child and you're like, I'm so grateful that my daughter is healthy and I hope it always stays that way. And it just, that kind of stuff brings me happiness and joy, just seeing that, seeing people around me, thriving and flourishing, and just seeing my parents being, somewhat healthy and things like that. And, um, you know, it I think though those kinds of things and being grateful for that just sheds a light on, um, that being grateful about that makes me, at least, um, it brings me joy, right? Because I'm grateful, rather than focusing on the negative. You have to be grateful for what you have versus being, angry about what you don't have. And I think
Mhm.
that to me brings me happiness, brings me joy. So that's what I feel like, reminding yourself every day of those things, especially when things are kind of all going down the drain and pretty quickly. You're just like, you know what? It could be worse. It could be worse. Let me be grateful for this, that, and the other, and let me not focus on how this is not working. Like, let's look at the positives.
Exactly. Our brains, if you think about it, if you are focused on gratitude, you can't really be in a state where you're having negative emotions. If you're experiencing gratitude or using your gratitude strength and being grateful for just the things every day, being grateful for waking up in the morning. We can't be in a negative state when we're feeling that way. And so that opens up the space for us to be happy. Like I said, happy is simply an emotion that comes and goes. And it's one of those emotions we all want more of. Well, if we want more of it, be grateful for what we have. Because when we're grateful, that just opens up that joy, like you were saying, Sandra. Like, even when things aren't going right, trying to find that gift in the mundane or in something that didn't go right. Is there a gift there? Can I be grateful for something in this situation? So yeah, and that's why gratitude is so tied to happiness, is simply that if we're feeling grateful, we can't be in a negative state. It's just impossible. Any other comments about gratitude? So my thing that I do every year in order to keep this strength going is November with Thanksgiving. I am one of those who does my 30 days of gratitude, and I do it on social media because it kind of then is, I have to do it. People are expecting me to post every day. I'm going to post every day, but you can do it in a journal. You can just do it with your spouse or your child that, for so many days, let's just practice gratitude every morning. It's something that, like Sandra said, can really just open up the space in order to be happy. Oh, Sandra, you did it last year too. I do it every year, and I forgot how many years in a row now I've been doing it. So you'll see me posting this Thanksgiving. All right, so the next one is the one that I mentioned earlier, zest, which for me, this was my lowest of these 5 strengths that correlate to happiness. This one was my lowest. And so zest really can be defined as being enthusiastic and excited about whatever is happening in your life. Just having that perspective of, this is awesome. And I know we can't do that all the time. There are things in our lives that we can't have this zestful feeling. But the more we can bring that uplifting energy, and that's really what it is. Zest is more of bringing this uplifting energy and being excited about things into our everyday experiences, the happier then we can be. I mean, if you think about it, when you're washing the dishes, not necessarily a happy task, but what happens if you had music on and you're kind of like just moving to the music? You'd probably be a little bit happier doing the dishes. And that is one way you can bring zest, is just having music on when you're cleaning the house, having music on when you're driving. I think that's the one that's in most movies. People turn on the radio and have that fun music going when they're driving somewhere. So again, thinking back to, where's a situation in your life that maybe you're not feeling as happy about? Can you bring some zest into that experience? It could be going to the office and bringing donuts to make everyone happy. This is a technique actually a lot of leaders do, right? Why do some managers have birthday celebrations? Well, they're trying to bring zest and excitement into the office. It's also tied, hopefully, to love and that they actually care about their employees. But even if they didn't have that love, they could still utilize zest to bring this energy, which then just creates this more joyful place of work. And I brought in work because sometimes we don't see that we can bring zest into the workplace. And it's not just our zest, we can bring it to others, which then creates this capacity to even have more happiness. So does anyone want to share here of anything that they've experienced or that they could use zest in the future to create more happiness in their lives?
Kathy, when I announce my retirement inspirement next month, I'm planning to buy milkshakes for everybody in the office.
Yeah, that's adding zest. You're utilizing zest right there to bring happiness, right? I mean, one story, if you've read Tony Robbins' Awaken the Giant Within, he talks about he came home from I forgot where and lost a bunch of money. His business partner, I don't know, all these bad things happened. And he had to make some phone calls. This was before he was famous and rich and everything. And he had to make some phone calls in order to try to get back on track and have some coaching clients and have some income coming in. So he thought, how can I do this and feel some joy and energy in this situation. And he had a hot tub. So he decided to make all his phone calls from the hot tub, that at least he got some zest and feeling good of sitting in the hot tub. So finding that even when we have to do hard things that maybe right now are not bringing us much joy, what can we add to it to lift us up? All right, any other comments on that? All right, so the last one and the last character strength I really see, and I left it last on this list. Via does not say this. This is my own take on it, but I think it's probably the most crucial, and that is hope. I feel my experience has been that if you don't have hope about the future, if you're just willing to be that I'm not all that happy and I'm not going to be, or this situation is never going to get better, or this relationship has no future, that's no hope. And if we don't have hope, it's really hard to use those other character strengths to bring happiness into that situation or that relationship. And being hopeful is not at all, just wishful thinking. There's a huge difference between having hope and being wishful. Hopeful people consider all the different pathways to get to their desire, to get to their destination. They have some confidence and motivation that they can get through these setbacks. And so it's being optimistic for the future, but it's with an understanding of how to get there. Or at least believing, if we don't know the how, at least believing that there is a way to get there. So it's different than just wishing this relationship would change, wishing this situation would change. Hopefulness is saying, this relationship, I am hopeful it's going to change because I know there are things I can do. There are different ways I can be with this person in order to improve this relationship, in order to create more happiness in my life. So using hope is really saying, being able to look to the future and identifying ways to get to that future that we really want. So if you go back to the same question I've asked for every one of these is, in a particular situation where you are right now, a relationship, how can you utilize hope in order to create more space for happiness in that situation?
I can answer this, and I'm sorry, I was taking a shower, so I'm in a towel. Um, me and my husband are both in a situation right now at work that we are at a crossroads where we have to figure things out. We have to make a choice, we have to make a decision, and we have to, and it sucks, right? But it's one of those things that we have to either say, okay, we're going to give in, or and maybe even regret for a very long time, if not forever, that we gave in, or we're going to have to figure out the next step, and for a while he was just like, well, there is no choice, we're just going to have to give in or whatever. And the other day he said, you know what, no, we're going to stick it through, we're going to see where it goes, and if it doesn't happen for us, then this is plan B. We can't just say that, especially when you're at a job that you've worked for 24 years and all of a sudden you're like, I might have to leave now. You're in a situation where you're just like, you know what, this isn't the only thing. There's other options. There is hope. There is, our job is not the only job that exists on this planet. There's always going to be something else we can do. There's always going to be somewhere else we can go. There's always going to be like a way to figure it out, but I think that if we give into the situation that we don't want to give into, I think that's going to cause us to possibly have regrets forever. Whereas, you know what, if now my daughter has to go potty, but if we if we decided that we're just going to stick to our guns, then then we're just gonna go with the flow and see what happens. And then being happy that we know that we made that decision for what we felt was best for us and our family. You know what I
Yep.
mean? There is hope.
Yeah,
But she has to go
that's
find now, so I'm gonna stop.
that is definitely bringing hope into a situation that we want more happiness in. So wanting more happiness in your life and being hopeful that we're going to make some changes and those are going to lead to having more happiness and more joy in our lives. So hope actually brings us right back to the first thing I said, is deciding whether you live in a friendly universe or a hostile universe. Because if you decide you live in a friendly universe, how could you not have hope, right? Believing in a friendly universe, you have hope that things are going to work out. I'm going to get to where I want to be. This relationship is going to improve. Anyone else want to comment on hope? All right, so winding down here, we have this quote from Abraham Lincoln: "Most people are about as happy as they make up their minds to be." It really comes down to, we know what makes us happy. And here now we even have research that shows, okay, if I do these other things, I can even improve my happiness. But if we don't choose to be happy, we can find the negative in probably anything. It's really our choice to find those things that are going to create more happiness for us. So I'm just going to open it up here at the end for anyone if have any thoughts, questions, anything they'd like to add here, because we are at our hour.
This was great. This was really very, very insightful. And as you were going through the 5 characters to happiness, I was then comparing each one to where it itemized on my list. So again, that was eye-opening as well. And I'm not judging myself, obviously. I view this as now an adventure, like, okay, how can I tackle this list? And especially these top 5 that you were mentioning here, and integrate them into my daily, like, be more aware of integrating them into my daily life and kind of see where that takes me, like what happens by me doing this. So I'll keep you posted, because I'm an analytical person, I'm a strategy person. So if I start doing this, I want to see, okay, what kind of results is it creating? So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Awesome. Awesome, Laura. I look forward to hearing how it goes. Keep me posted. Anyone else before we end here? All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And if you do have questions, I'm happy to help. Please reach out. The character strengths are part of our exploration program. I think I mentioned it to you in the emails that I sent. So if you want your total 24, if you want a one-to-one to go over it, please reach out and we can get you started on that. And it's something I use in my coaching practice. Rita can attest to it. This is part of one of the things I really focus on.
Yeah, and Kathy, you know that all 5 of those are in my top. So come on.
That's why you're one of the happiest people I know, Rita.
There you go. There you go.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank
Have
you.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.